First of all, before we really dive into the topic, one hands up, anyone who has seen the Safe Open Vehicle Core presentation I gave in Denver, which is actually perfect. Otherwise, but still, why it's not acting? Here we go. I marked the other two relevant sessions which are going on in parallel, which I saw because we're here as a safety critical and automotive. So you're either in automotive or interested in safety critical system or both. So there's a 10 years lessons learned from AGL, which Walt wanted to give since a long time and he's doing today. And the other one is the OSS documentation workshop. I looked into the slides, it looks a promising thing. And documentation is actually a strong topic or a big topic. So your last chance to just leave the room. I don't care that much, of course a bit, but I recommend the other one. So I would be at one of those if I wouldn't be here. But a bit about me, and maybe you didn't understand. So I'm Senior OSS Community Manager at Etas. Etas is a 100% subsidiary of BOSCH. They recently also gave me like this title, Automotive Open Source Software Process Lead. You can make up your mind what this means. Then I'm the chair of the technical steering committee of the ELISA project. Joined the ELISA project since the beginning, 2019, being basically at everything you can imagine on workshops and so on. And that's why I also set up the demo currently, or just before at the booth. I lead the systems working group where we try to create a reference system, basically follow instructions and you can create your system on your own. That's the purpose of it. I'm a member of the Linux Foundation Europe, not the other one, advisory board and not the board, so it's a little bit lower than the S, but still fun. And I'm open source enthusiast and promoter. And my VPN connection continues to try to connect and comes up with it. So now, a bit about the Eclipse SDV. We are at the Linux Foundation event, but they are accepting also competing foundations. That's quite nice. S-Core is a top logo. If you search for it, it's always Safe Open Vehicle Core, and you should typically say Eclipse Safe Open Vehicle Core. That's the official project name, but everybody just calls it S-Core, or sometimes Score. You can decide. I think there's no pattern on this. I'll give a bit of motivation there, then an overview, how things are organized, structured, how the processes look like, because we're safety critical and a lot of things are around processes, and then also how you can get into it. We stick to a high level, but I find it quite confusing with all the resources available on the S-Core to just see like how to judge them, where to look at, what is it all about. And I uploaded the slide, the links are in there, so you have like a guideline where you can just also follow the links, get some information, get news, latest trends. And I just figured out I missed one link, so I need to update this later on the actual roadmap, but I show you a bit about this. And then we have hopefully time enough for Q&A, so I rush through some things. First of all, motivation. Well, automotive was good in collaborating, not always in the open. They have joint ventures, partnerships, consortia, many attempts on things. And what they now see is like, even in these trials, it would be better if we have an open source base on this. Right. So this is like the common stack for collaboration. The idea is to be speedier, better, because if you collaborate, things get faster. Based on my experience, that doesn't hold true. The more people you get, the harder it gets. So if you want to move fast, right, do it alone. If you want to go far, do it together. Then of course what we know, if you go for open source for standards and so abstraction, extensibility, adding modules, and so that's really a benefit and hard to achieve with like buying services from suppliers. And all sufficient quality was the goal, to bring directly the quality to the open source part. Quality in the sense of what automotive understands often around CMMI and specifically ASPICE and these kind of processes, because they are thought to, if you follow them, it's quality. ISO 26262 is also a big topic, and for this you can see another time VPN. It's basically focused on safety critical in-car components and on the microprocessor side. So it's the ADAS, body and driving parts. You see that it says in scope for IVI, and you wonder what's the safety thing about IVI. And if you read the small text below, it says, well, you know, we are not limiting it to the things you can use it for IVI, but actually we don't look for IVI. We look into safety critical parts. The old microcontroller, little small ECUs are not in scope actually, and all the cloud things are also not in scope. So that's it. A bit on the working model, I think this is one interesting slide, and where I also get often questions afterwards. So first of all, we have people contributed software, so there could be open source components in there, it could be single contributions, and what we see in the past, these were typically just code drops, and then they were integrated by a tier, and then got into the OEM or the tier 1, wherever you are, and you added safety to it and did all these qualification parts, and here is like what they call the shift left one. So you shift left toward the beginning, so here also left on the side, you try to get safety parts already in, and you have open source software. In order to enhance some part of it, you want to, it's a nice word, it's like core full stack, right? So you either have full stack or you have a core, but typically a core is not a full stack, but they call it core full stack. It's used on reference hardware, and it mentions like committer to contributor. It's a wording change because the committer have some more things to consider on the process side, on following functional safety processes, need to prove their past work and that they are liable for being in the committer range. So that's in there, and they also look then that the different components get together with the tools, become a platform. And it's not that this thing, so it should be in a safety certifiable stage. We are in safety critical software track, but it's not that it will be fully safety certified. That's currently not the plan. The safety certification and the liability along with it and the bring up to customer hardware and so on, this should be done by a distributor, which will be the software vendor. They may enhance it with some additional add-ons with their value add and services. Still, the idea is that if a tier 1, more likely the OEM, would like to change things, they can do so by going to another provider of this stack, another distributor, by keeping then the tools identical and the software platform. Especially the tools have been an issue in the past, because even if you had things like AutoSAR adaptive and so on, every vendor comes with own tools. So even if you have a commonality in APIs and other parts, you're locked in or bound quite easily into a provider because you're relying on their ecosystem. And for this part, it's the intention by the OEMs here seems also to be, we bring in the tools, we bring in the software stack, and we have a freedom to choose. In both directions, as a distributor, you can have service partners, but also at the higher level. So it's really on the business side of it. Yeah, you can see here it's a little more on the stack itself. It's more the middleware layer of it, and it's like this ecosystem around all these parts. It should be fully OSS as a platform. It should follow processes directly matching what automotive demands, including also ISO 21434 for security, ASPICE compliance up to level 2 or 3. We'll need to see where it ends up, and ISO 262. The tool chains should be involved, the tooling as such, and what I also like is the development environment. So it's built on VS Code. You can also use it from the command line if you have another IDE of choice, or directly anyway use whatever Vim or so I don't think you do. It may also integrate into Emacs, I don't know. At least you have something from VS Code you can run there, you get highlighting, you get extensions, so you have a good look and feel. You can use the command prompt then there. The idea is to have faster development speed, and like these kind of get resilience and quality, so on. So I think it's like high-level marketing-ish slides which we have in. More interestingly, from an overview perspective, there was a project announcement. If you see this on the main web page, actually the top bar is there as one, so like the timeline, and you see the elements below. And it looks that they have a direct relationship. And I decoupled these pictures because I feel that this is the sort of timeline and this is the thought of steps we're doing, but I'm not really sure if they are really fully aligned, because from what was originally there, it looks like the SCORE release is already out and we are almost done with other parts, but it's not yet there. The SCORE release 0.5 with the first components we expect to be around at the end of the year, to be really in a good certifiable release state. And the 0.1 was just like the very first trials, it was the very first small component to just see like, can we create documentation, all these parts, a lot of process work was based on this. And now we check like, what do we do in the first step? What will we do in a 1.0 release? It's very funny that someone decided to call it 0.5 because it sounds like you're halfway done, but nobody prevents us from a 0.11 or 12 or 0.50, right? It's just should give the impression you're halfway there. That's just to mention, we will have multiple cycles and the whole stack thingy should be going into serious shifting phase, stability evaluation parts later on towards 26. Yeah, the stack itself, this is the one which you find on the one web page. I put two views over there, and to show you how the other view looks like, it's like this. This you'll find in the real documentation. It depends what you like. This is the more fancy one for a web page. This is like done by the engineers. And you can see the different color codes. You see the yellow ones, left side has a lot of yellow parts in there. That's basically tooling, infrastructure, what you need to have prepared. And then the yellow parts are there. Essential part, what they decided to see, this is something you need when you want to build on a very first simple ADAS application. And then you will enhance. There is this AI, artificial intelligence part in there, because you need this. If you look here, it's no longer there. And we're not really talking a lot about currently about AI applications and so on in what we're building. And then, yeah, the green modules are all in place. This is just the high-level picture, but everything gets tracked and monitored from progress and planned within GitHub. And it's really transparent, so you can follow. And before you fully believe what a generated image on a timeline says, you should make up your impression based on the progress of the artifacts. By this, here you see the recent status of the progress. It's within the feature requests part and the modifications, and the link to the project view is there, so you can see milestones, where should things go, and so on. These are basically the green marked part, which are marked as accepted. This means there has been an evaluation. I'm not sure if I keep the picture in or not. But there's an evaluation phase, analysis, requirements, stakeholder requirements need to be created. What is the feature scope which you plan to do? So you evaluate this. The architectural team and the technical leads assess it and see if it fits, if it's a match. And then it can end up here. So like you see the 0.5 parts, you find the FEO model, IPC, logging, persistency. These are all elements which you also have in the adaptive part. Regarding version 1.0, so you can see this progress, the state is completely different. There's a bunch of ready for review, looking into it. There's actual even rejected parts or withdrawals on some parts. You see where with the labels where things belong to, so you get a very transparent view. And this is the highest level. So if you're interested in one topic, you can just click on it. You're in the apex of all these kind of things. You get details on what has been planned as tasks, who has assigned task, partially with effort estimation. And you already see the bunch of names. Actually, this is what I just checked. So we have more than 70 individual contributors. I presented this in May. This was looking completely different, especially because in May, my name was still somewhere in the top contributor list, but I took a long vacation and suddenly I'm no longer visible. I'm somewhere lost in this little bar there with 1 or 2 contributions. 10 companies are involved. What I put a little bit in is like with BMW and Mercedes, they were starting OEMs in this endeavor. Accenture, Etas, Quarix were those which basically also came in with a start, directly contributed, and really just a fraction of a second later, so like after the Formula launch, Conti, Electrobit, Red Hat also started to show interest. And it's just like where we have track record of. There's also a bunch of contributors which are not listed here, where the assignment is not proper. So I just took the statistics from the Eclipse side. Right, tools. I really look into have everything as tools as open source available. You will later say, wait, have you said something about QNX? What about this free tool? That's the other part, that the reference system, but how to build the modules, how to integrate, and so on. This is all on tools which are openly available. PlantUML is there to draw the diagrams, while the textual descriptions is the validity. The PlantUML diagrams are more for showing how things look like. Sphinx-needs is there with Sphinx, so we have a docs as code approach. Bazel is used to build the things. C++ and Rust are the programming languages, so no C code is accepted. And if you go back to the slides here where you see the modules overview, this was too small and too detailed to put it in here, but there you also see which one are Rust and which one are C++ based or which one serve both. Right, this is about the tools basically. From the process side, there are two things. So you can go into the documentation for the project and for the process. These are two repositories. They have been one, but we decoupled the repositories so that the process description can be taken as standalone, and you can apply these processes if you want to, also to other projects and follow them. So we have been, for example, in discussion with AUTOSAR consortia if they want to adopt some parts of tooling and processes so that they are closer aligned to what the S-Core is doing. At the left side, also with the boxes, I think I show it on the next side, you will have a continuous update on where the process is. So we are currently in maturity level state 1, and we want to go to level 2, which means the processes are not only defined, but also executed, lived, and properly done in the process. And there you find all the general documentation. If it comes to practical things, so just this morning I was reviewing a verification plan for a feature for the persistency, or I think about the key value storage. This one you will find in the project documentation, but the templates and what is need to be filled and so on and how the process looks like, that's in the process description. So you can map these two. Here set, now currently everything is yellow. The last time things were white and yellow when I presented some part of it in Denver. And the maturity level 2 is about to come toward the end of the year. When we really come to 0.5, then you should see also practical implementation of every process, artifact, work product, and how the workflows are lived. This includes then the implementation of FUSA audit findings. So we already executed a bunch of audits, interim audits on the process, and next one is coming something around October, a small one, and then I think December, January for really closing the gaps. Oh yeah, I have the roadmap later on, that's good. Then software development part, this is also super small, but again, you have the link. What it basically shows is you have the highest level, which is the blue one. This represents stakeholder environment, platform level things, and we're not doing a full platform part because we have a reference thing. The real platform testing enhancements will be done by the distributors, or if the OEM wants to do on their own or tier 1, they can also do. The things to understand is basically the lowest part is the unit level testing, detailed design parts. Then you create the architecture requirements around it as component, that's the green, and a feature which collects different components and modules to like a clustered thing. And you always have, by this you follow the V model basically, or the artifacts from the V model. You not directly have to follow the V, as we also integrate pre-existing sources. But you just get like whose things are traced, and there's also always automated checks behind. So if you try to create a requirement on a component level, you will only be able to add it to the tooling or to the documentation of the product if you have a matching stakeholder requirement and so on. So there will auto checks for traceability, for example. Right, then, yeah, you see the audit timeline. The first audit was actually in November 2024. You may wonder if the project starts in December, how you can already have an audit. But there was an incubator project where a base on process documentation build tooling was prepared to submit to the Eclipse SDV. And by this, we looked into change management, safety management, and then continued all different areas of the ISO 26262. It's not an ASPICE audit currently, and also not a security audit, but at the end of this development cycle for 1.0, you have a certification part of ISO 262 up to ASIL B. It's not that we say this is an ASIL B product or so, or that's the definition of it, that's the choice of the one who creates the product. It's basically just said there are recommended methodologies for testing and so on, and we focus mainly on the things for B or marked for ASIL C and D methods tools as optional. By covering the ISO part, we cover also a lot of things from ASPICE level 2 or other elements, and we have the security parts as well. There's like fast testing, for example, is something which comes in from the ISO 21434, as I understood. but this is not directly requested, for example, by the ISO 26262, right? That's just like on this process side, and you can really feel, if you're used to open source project, if you're used to contribution, and for example, you file an improvement or a bug report, you see a lot of fields which become mandatory. So when I was like on 4 or 5 weeks of vacation, so I took a long summer vacation, I came back. In the meantime, things progressed. I figured, oh, there's some missing evidence. So I created an improvement thing, and they directly asked me like, okay, what is the thing you have to improve? Yeah, that's what I want to do. What is the way how you propose to implement it? Okay, yeah, basically doing like this and that. How much effort do you estimate it will take to implement these kind of things? Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'll write down 4 hours. And then it comes like, does it affect any architectural feature or something? Like, not that I'm aware of. I'm just improving the process. But you can see like a lot of these questions which you get asked in a change control are currently added. The good thing is we'll see how practice, or it will run in practice, because we are in the maturity level 1, and we will do refinements, checkings, and so on. There are also not detailed checks. So if you write down how many effort it is, and if you write down an I don't know yet, that's also accepted. Right? But then you have made a statement on this, and someone else kind of says it. So this is all important if you want to contribute. First step on a contribution would be to create an Eclipse account, because it's running in the Eclipse Foundation, and they typically want you to have an Eclipse account so that you also sign the contributor license agreement virtually, like just click on it, accepting the terms and so on. And if you're hesitating, you still can reach out to the people in there. But if you really want to contribute with something, it's highly recommended to do so. And then you can just fork the repo, create a pull request on whatever topic you like. You may wonder, like, where should I go? Here's how things are set up. It looks like a typical open source project, I would say. So we have like project leads, we have technical leads, we have many, many teams, cross-functional teams, and so on. No, maybe it's not. It's really much closer to what automotive industry is used to do. So the technical leads are actually more due to the terms how, this is a term from the Eclipse Foundation, they are typically technical leaders, but in the S-Core project, they start as project leaders. So they are having control about timeline to the project planning, prioritization, and so on, which you may not be used to when you're in the open source world. And then the project lead circle, which it actually says here, these are more like a governing board. So the upper management, which steers the direction. So most of you, or I assume at least because you're here and don't look too much management side-ish, you may want to look into the bottom part. What's quite nice is like you may come in and either that you say, I come for a feature part, or I'm more in a software architecture framework, I'm like testing, so you can find your community, and then you can even do cross matches. So for example, I support the development process part, as you could see from my original role, which they gave me, but I'm also having a background from testing. So currently my testing part goes also into the logging team. So I support the cross-functional team logging, but just a little bit. And then they can come with process questions or testing questions to me, because I'm there from this community side. And by this, we make sure that we have a good communication from cross-functional teams which develop features, and that they have a chance to reach out to architects, to development, process people, infrastructure people, and so on. Infrastructure is a little bit smaller. They are not in every part, but they bring the most code. So if you look into the distributor diagram, you could see Max and Alex as one of the main parts. They are responsible for creating all the build tooling, infrastructure setups, and so on. So they're the main contributors there. And I can give a loud shout out here because they are doing a really great job. They have hard times in bringing like 40 plus repositories together, making that build. So be patient. But what I also heard from colleagues was like one of my colleagues started the work and he said, you know, I started it and as always, nothing worked. And then I was typing a ticket, and guess what? I was surprised. I had the impression while I was typing the ticket, already someone was typing the response. So it's like, this was going on. And then I repeated it in another repository and didn't work. So it's, I mean, but that's something which you experience in other parts as well, right? You have things where things progressing, others one you have a chance to pick up. I put a long list of reference in here. And basically the GitHub entry point, you can see status of certain repositories. You have the documentation part, process documentation, mailing list. If you subscribe, directly create a filter that it sorts out somewhere, or I don't know what's your preferred message, but there's a lot of things because GitHub notifications get in, workgroup notification, and there's a central mailing list. So I just collect the things there and mark them as read when I feel there are 1,000 items in there or so. So you really need to do like check your part, filtering for it, or just go directly in GitHub and have your tools there. What really helps is the metrics chat. So you have public channels in there for SCORE, and I put the intro link. I hope it works. Otherwise, just go for SDV contribution part. And then there is the calendar also for the meetings, so you can just join this. The thing is, they currently still set up, so there are some meetings which may be still a Teams meeting, WebEx meeting, whatever you could imagine, Zoom meeting, and not everything is transferred to the environment of Eclipse SDV, but it's improving, so they transfer step by step. You just may not find everyone, and they always identify with SCORE. Okay, if you browse through the repos, you can see that's 43. I did the screenshot one repository too late, otherwise I would have 42. And from the activity, what you can see that one of the top is the SCORE part. The SCORE is a central repository, it's a base repository. So if you want to try out how your dev container works, if it works also, I recommend to start with a SCORE. And then there are incubation repositories, which tell you like here, someone has submitted an idea, but it's not accepted yet as a feature. This incubation, something will turn into a not incubation repository afterwards, then it's accepted and is in the active development. Process description I mentioned, and you can also read basic things on Docs code, tooling parts if you're interested in the infrastructure for the cost repo parts. I put another two links to start with, so the development environment, you can see the most simple thing is to just load the Bazel disk, go for the Bazel version, check out the repo, and start building. There's a dev container setup and so on. Sometimes as they evolve in the way and they're quite flexible in moving forward, you may need to do a combination of both, but we're in progress of making it better. And then I put one thing in, if you want to give a trial, you can build the FEO, the fixed execution order. Interesting, this is in the incubation side. There is a FEO one which is not in Inc FEO as you can read, but just in FEO. And there is no example yet because they are populating it now. And these were just the trials which have been like written, prepared, like you would do now code first side, but not every artifact is there, not everything is prepared, not every requirement. This is coming with the FEO, and then the example will be transferred. So you need to shift at some point in time. But it's quite nice. So here you can see, does my build work? What is an example? You could actually even go to reference integration. It's an own repo. And within this, I don't want to show much. There's a long documentation how you download your QNX 8 open source. No, they always say open source and I start to use it. You can download the QNX 8 community edition something for non-commercial use these thing. It's still not open source because there's no source in there, but you have a QNX to trial and build on top. That's just the current thing, because if you want to have an early start in the production soon, QNX may be still a choice, but there's also the incubation part, for example, for the AutoSD. And also CodeThink is currently trying to bring the stack on their control, and also Electrobit is doing with their Corpus Linux, so expect Linux part there from Red Hat, CodeThink, Electrobit also as Linux-based distributions that you can build on top. And it's just a matter of the next months, I guess, until you see something and maybe also be able to download from there. And by this, I would close for questions. Yeah, first one, yeah.
Hi, I'm Alessandro from Huawei. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood completely what you are doing here, but I have a question. So, in ELISA, we are trying to to do some methodology and tooling for qualification of the kernel. So it seems here that you are doing similar things, but at higher level.
Very simplified, yes. So it's more on, it's like the stack above the operating system, it's on the middleware layer.
Yes.
And I would see a fundamental difference to the other activities, like saying like Linux involvement, or you take Xen, Zephyr. So yeah, in there you have a community established, and you have also community processes established, but they were not fundamentally for functional safety or so. And the real difference is that here they start from the beginning and have basically started with the process, an ISO 26262 compliant process with selecting components and so on. And you will find a lot of existing automotive components which go in there, which have been previously developed according to the standard. And therefore, that's, I would see as a methodologically different way of doing it, and why it most likely also doesn't feel always like this is really open source. It feels more like it's open source license, it's an open source environment, and you can contribute, but you still have a burden of a lot of traditional automotive rigorous processes.
Okay. 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 Your reply. My question should be, yeah. If you use open source software in your middleware, you will end up to the same problem that we have in ELISA, because you have to control the process of this open source component that you want to integrate.
Right. So there are two ways in this. So on the one side, integrating an open source component, we were considering to use Trustable also. So the coding people come with a Trustable software framework. That's what I say with my laptop, which is not super steady. And the other thing is that what we did was we took, for example, JSON component library as a trial, and we figured out they bring, as it was written in Rust, they bring already a set of test cases and so on, but not everything matches our way of documentation. And this is something which you shouldn't do, but still, we started with it. We just brought in descriptions as patches on top, right? So we just created patches and then applied the patches on the later source. So we update them the sources frequently, and we see that, hope that we don't have too much breaking changes, but you all know if you experience that over the time, you will have your patches not being applicable anymore. But you end up there, yes, as well, and therefore Trustable could be an option to do so. And the other thing is, you don't know how many other open source components at the end will end up and being taken as a core part. What's interesting though is some part may also not be in the S-Core repo structure, like the OpenSOVD, which has been brought in by our Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation. What they put in, they have an own repo, and they said we will provide artifacts and we will be close to the S-Core and maybe even follow the process. But it would be stupid to think that if you have a real open source component that you would go there and say, oh, you know, we want to use it for our automotive use case. Do you want to follow all our processes and rewrite your things with requirements and so on? That will not work. Yeah, but it's a real issue.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Stefan from Wind River. I had a quick question, maybe I missed it. When you showed this diagram on development process, I know it's maybe more a verification activity, but I was curious not to see anything on the safety analysis side. Like, are you exploring any open tool framework around safety analysis? Yeah.
So safety analysis is part of it. We were mentioning fault tree analysis, for example, also in the documentation, FMEA parts, and so on. But it's not that there is any defined tool. It's more like we use this methodology and it's documented. But the actual execution on certain modules is also just progressing, right? Due to that, as the first modules are just getting added. As mentioned, it's not directly visible in this diagram. Not everything is there. This basically gives you the tracking of some artifacts. But if you look, you can go into the process description, and in the workflows, you will find work product, and then you will find also the safety analysis. And you don't see, for example, also the QA reports later on. There's a software verification report and a module verification for feature verification. So you have several types of reports. These are also not in this overview, right, but mentioned.
Yeah, so my question would be regarding the work that was already done as part of AGL, so Automotive Linux, though you are using QNX, ultimately Linux will come, and they did some work with vSum IP and others also in the middleware stack, right?
Yeah.
They also have some kind of application stack and all also running. So is there any plan to pull the good stuff from there, or is it a separate parallel thing?
Yeah, so
don't want to live in that
right.
world.
So there's there's a lot of things with AGL, which is like in the operating system layer, but as you mentioned, like with some IP, vSum IP or other parts, it's not that there would be a direct pull, because also those which are currently contributing may have an implementation of some IP, a preferred one or so, may not directly use vSum IP. What we observed, like also with some Word.io parts and so on, because there's a lot of activity in the AGL also recently with their software-defined vehicle expert group, and we saw like in the discussions, we did a joint workshop with, actually we talked about the Eclipse S-Core within the ELISA workshop, having Volvo, Toyota, Honda in there as AGL representatives, and in this we also discussed initial thoughts in this environment without having like two former representatives from the technical lead circle of S-Core. I said like, it could be, assume an OEM or a tier who is ever involved in AGL and like base the solution on AGL, they come and they can just create a feature request for the thing. But I don't see that we take the direct pull and say like, oh, let's use the vSum IP implementation. Things which could come like, could be to check what is about U protocol, which is like an Eclipse SDV, or also the Cuxar part was something to be discussed. Do we put the Cuxar in, which is actually also used in the AGL part, right? These were discussions which happened in the past.
But AGL is more on the IVI side, where what I see you guys are more focusing on the ADAS side. Is that understanding correct?
This understanding is correct. I mean, I have shown this applicable part, that was the IVI, but with the move, like you see the SDV expert group in AGL, and you also have like the instrument cluster one. Instrument cluster are safety critical. While I would say what we're targeting here is not like instrument clusters. I would put it more to the IVI side. But also AGL is like discussing like which hypervisor to use, safety critical workloads. And also if AGL is a lot of Linux, they also add the Android parts in there, right? So we see that there is an overlap and that also AGL is moving. And yeah, and the ELISA project actually also considered, should we base on AGL and bring them later on S-Core on top, and also try to foster this collaboration to see where does it make sense, or any other open source Linux version to bring on top. Yeah.
So the idea, like last question, so idea would be to bring these nice features as part of the incubation report.
This is the way, yeah. So the idea is not to bring this feature. The idea could be to bring this feature, right? So I don't say we bring these features, but exactly, it always starts as an incubation, and in this incubation phase, you fill out a template. We're saying like, that's the purpose of it. That's why I believe it is good for. That's use cases fulfilled. These are stakeholder requirements on this. And then you go through some iterations. It can actually be, so like say you propose and say, we need something like a vSum IP. And then you see like, okay, there are 5 other SUM IP implementations in the market or available. What of them is suitable? And then I will check like, is it already open source? Is there source available? Could it be open sourced? Or is there a maintainer? So they will check for different criteria. And that's also how they did with like the INC part in there, persistency, FEO part. They typically, like for the first one, they held an explicit workshop and assessed different solutions and said, okay, we want to do logging. Who has logging proposals? Let's assess then which one will be the best. And by this, it could be then an option. So, and yeah, even if you propose, it may end up that the feature gets in, but with a different implementation.
Thank you.
Oh, we have one more question.
So this is like ADAS, and then we have IVI, but if you look at small body control BMS, where do you think the future lies for SDV for that?
It's a more generic question. So
Yeah.
for the S-Core part, they currently sort it out. I mean, that the easy thing, for a small ECU kind of body control, and so you see different moves, but you see there's new players in the market where new things come up. So we have very traditional ones which just continue in the way they have. So like say if you have small ECU, which was AutoSAR and it is established with autos, there is not a strong likeliness that someone wants to make a shift. But especially with seeing the 100 plus OEMs coming from China, which are high speed, then taking practical example, there is the Halo S from Li Auto, which was there, and they based some work on NUTX and then have like an ARTIS, which is not the typical ARTIS you would expect for smaller control units. And so I think the main trend of SDV currently goes into the microprocessor world, central zone ECUs, the larger part, because it's like the direct thing where you can play with. So that's why the microcontroller, smaller ECU, small microprocessor are not going exactly in this phase. But what we observe is that also there people start thinking about, can I make use of Linux, for example? Can I use other open source technology? I hear also movements where they started and say, okay, we were doing bare metal on some part and we want to change for bare metal because what someone just yesterday or the day before said, like microprocessors turn into macroprocessor, a microcontroller turn into macrocontroller, right? Because they bring so much more performance and suddenly things like Zephyr come into place, or some talk about ThreadX. Zephyr, of course, brings you a lot of ecosystem and this makes it attractive. And then you could go this step, and this is some movement which happens, but I see it smaller compared to where the car manufacturers, tiers, and so they put the main money into this zonal centralization of ECUs and this high performance compute in their SDV use cases.
Yeah, so I think in the small microcontrollers become like very fast, so you can run some IP on it, but the challenge is to reuse because you cannot run Linux on it, but you can run this NUTX, Zephyr, maybe.
Yeah, and more what you need to observe in things, then we may conclude or conduct this or close the session. What you need to see, we were also discussing on bringing a certain feature onto a microcontroller and say, like, with this a use case, could we do this? And it's often better to just make up your mind, is it really the functionality you need, right? So rather than progressing, like transferring from one protocol to another, implementing certain protocols, you can even pack some kind, like if you think of Open 1722, you can just pack a payload of CAN and then directly transfer the CAN payload via an Ethernet stack, and then it makes sense to write certain application, but don't do heavy processing on the microcontroller when you don't have to. Our tendency would just be like move this feature as it is, just there, but sometimes it makes more sense like just cut what is actually the thing which you want to transfer, where can I reduce it, and then you enhance the feature, get new functionality, but not doing it in the same way like you would have done on a microprocessor.
So is the virtual ECU then also part of S-Core, you think?
Virtual ECUs?
Yeah, so doing the local compute, maybe in AGL, whatever.
Virtual ECU part is a little bit part of S-Core, but more on the higher performance side. And the S-Core project as such really focuses on this middleware stack and try to avoid any hardware relationship where possible, any other parts around it, which will not work totally, but it really understands itself as being OS independent, hardware independent, and being like a standard library you would deploy on your desktop environment as a tool stack. We're over the time, minutes already. Okay, good.